Welcome everyone here at the Balie. Good evening. Also people who are looking at the live stream, very welcome. My name is Leonard Boy and I will be hosting tonight's event on the shifting perspectives on anti-colonial violence and resistance in regarding the Battle of Surabaya. And the occasion of this evening is the publication of Marjolein van Pagee's new book, Bung Tomo and the Revolution of 1945, and of course the 78th anniversary of that revolution. And we will discuss this topic with her and various speakers from both Indonesia and the Netherlands. And we are very proud and happy they are here. And you can already see their names. Besides Marjolein van Pagee, we will introduce Ady Setyawan, Robin Raven, and Fitria Yelita. But that's later for tonight. History is written by the victors, as the saying goes. Indonesia won the battle for independence, and it has been writing its history ever since. In Indonesia, that is. In the Netherlands, there is a whole different narrative and history of coming to terms with our colonial past. In the last few years, more and more attention has been given to the role the Dutch played after they refused to recognize Indonesian independence in August 1945. And much has been said and debated about extreme violence that the Dutch inflicted upon the Indonesians during that period. And that will be discussed over and over again for the following years to come, I think. But tonight we will be focusing on about the Battle of Surabaya and those violent first months. That is, before the Netherlands sent their full-scale army into Indonesia. And how do the Indonesians perceive these events? And how does this differ from Dutch memories? How do we judge Indonesian violence in Indonesia and in the Netherlands? And how does this relate to the Dutch violence of that time and even before? And how do we qualify this violence? Is it resistance or terrorism, anti-colonial or racist? It's all very sensitive for all sides, and we therefore need to formulate and listen carefully and keep understanding today's perspective. And to do that, we start with Indonesian historian Ady Setyawan, to open up with a short lecture on the Battle of Surabaya, and to discuss how this Battle of Surabaya and the events leading up to that are remembered in his hometown. Ady Setyawan is specialized in the Revolution of 1945 and wrote several books about Indonesian struggles for independence. And he is also founder of the Rodebrug Surabaya, a foundation that aims to inspire younger generations to learn more about history. Give him a big hand, Ady Setyawan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Talking about Bung Tomo, we cannot separate his name with Battle of Surabaya, which is the biggest and the most brutal battle during the Independence War from 1945 to 1949. I have to explain in 15 minutes about this battle. How it happened, how it ends. So, on August 17, 1945, we received the news about proclamation on the same day from Jakarta. In Surabaya, we heard the news exactly at the same days. Then, the news was distributed in Surabaya via radio and newspaper. But we use Japanese and Madura's language to avoid Japanese censorship. Then, at the end of the August, we have this term, vlaggenactie. At that time, the red and white flag, or Indonesian flag, raised in every corner in the city. Yeah, vlaggenactie took place by the end of the August 1945. It's such a psychological warfare, because during the Dutch occupation, Queen Wilhelmina's birthday was annually celebrated every August. So, every August, they asked the Indonesian to raise the Dutch flag. They have to. So for Indonesian, it felt like a slap in the face. It was like the Dutch dancing over the Indonesian suffering, the ceremony. But when vlaggenactie took place, it had huge impact on Indonesian people. This is how it looks. Then imagine, for so many years, always red, white, and blue, and then suddenly it turns red and white. For Indonesian, it took big impact, but also for the Dutch. But what's on Indonesian minds at that time? We ever interviewed this veteran, Haryo Kecik. In 1945, he was a medical student. During his life, he wrote many books. He also known as a painter. He spoke English, Dutch, and Russian fluently. He tells us, do you know what's on our minds at that time? After World War II, we never thought that the Dutch would return to reoccupy Indonesia again. The Japanese already surrendered. The war was over. We really thought that all foreigners would return to their own countries to rebuild their own nations. But one single action changed our minds. That's what he tells us. This is his photo. And then we have this term, a flag incident or the flag incident. So on September 19, 1945, some people from IEV or Indo-Europees Verbond put the red, white, and blue flag on the top of the Oranje Hotel. Before the war, the IEV was a very well-known racist organization, of which Meester in de Rechten, Wim Ploegman, was an active member. The flag was raised a few days after the light organization RAPWI arrived in Surabaya. By Indonesians, it was perceived as disrespect of the newly proclaimed republic, as if the Dutch wanted to show their power. Through this event, Indonesians realized that the Dutch were indeed planning to return and reoccupy Indonesia again. So, the action from the Surabaya people was taking over the Japanese arsenals. After September 19 until October 1st, 1945, Indonesian youth started with attacking Japanese patrols and their military posts. Eventually, they managed to take over several military bases. The last fight was at the Raad van Justitie, a building that was used by the Japanese as the headquarters of the Kempeitai, or the Japanese police. Everywhere, Indonesian militia started to organize themselves based on their occupation, such as train worker militia or post office militia, and etc., or their ethnicity. PRI Maluku, PRI Sulawesi, PRI Kalimantan, or PRI Sunda Kecil, and many more. In 1945, in this period, everyone had to choose sides. The flag incident was the fire starter for the revolution in Surabaya or even in Indonesia, started by some Indo-Dutch people. PRI, or Pemuda Republik Indonesia, they had their base at the Simpang Club, captured Indo-Dutch and Dutch people who were suspected to support or collaborate with the Dutch. We call them a collaborator, the Dutch collaborator. PRI members did use excessive violence, but when the Indonesian police heard about it, they gave a warning. A police commander Yasin wrote in his memoir, "If they wouldn't have stopped, we would have attacked them." Then British came in Surabaya. The first British troops landed in peace on October 25, 1945, in peace, based on an agreement with the Indonesian authorities that they would only take care of the prisoners of war and would not seize Indonesian weapons. The British were given permission to make use of important buildings in the city. But on October 27, the British dropped leaflets asking the Surabaya freedom fighters to surrender their weapons. The Surabaya people then realized that the British were just same like the Dutch in betraying the truce. So between the 28th and 30 October 1945, the war broke out, known as the Battle of Surabaya, the first phase. During this battle, this first phase battle, around 40,000 British soldiers under the leadership of Brigadier Malapi were nearly wiped out. The only way to stop the escalation was to call Sukarno and Hatta to go to Surabaya. They urged the people of Surabaya to stop the fighting. But then Brigadier Malapi got killed on October 30, 1945. It's written on this book, the memoir of the story of the 23rd Indian Division in Surabaya. So what happened next? It was calm before the storm. From 1 to 9 November 1945, the British troops in Surabaya increased until around 30,000 personnel in total, combining land, sea, and air force. From 1 to 9 November, there was a letter exchange between the Indonesian Governor Suryo and the British Major General Mansur. The governor insisted to avoid the major battle and asked to set up a joint investigation team to conduct research on who had killed Malapi. And then on November 9, 1945, the British dropped pamphlets in which they asked the Surabaya people to surrender and gave up their arms. So the pamphlets happened twice. On the Indonesian side, everyone knew that it was madness to fight the British army with a newborn army that was just 1 month old. But with the resistance, Indonesians want to send a message. Enough was enough. No more dehumanization, no more apartheid. The Indonesian people believe that with the independence, the next generation will be able to enjoy better education and end poverty. Merdeka atau mati, or freedom or death, was not just an empty slogan. The British, with their bombing, also sent out a message. On the other hand, this is what will happen if you are against us. With the bombing, they set an example in Surabaya. So this is the most important leaders in Surabaya. Governor Suryo, as the East Java governor, Muhammad, Mangundiprojo, Haryo Kecik, Resident Sudirman, Mustopo, and Sutomo. But Sutomo, he didn't have a big army or having important role in military unit, but he have important role on media at the time, which is radio. For Indonesia, nothing is fair. World War II supposed to be over. Everybody should have returned to their own countries. It were British who first broke the agreement, then put the blame on Indonesians after their brigadier got killed, after which they gave an ultimatum. Were the Indonesians ready for a major battle? Yes and no. Their spirit was ready, but technically they did not have a chance against the most modern army of that time. But colonialism is never fair anyway. This is the major battle on November 10, 1945. What's on people's mind in Surabaya at the time? We can hear example from one testimonies of the veterans. Indonesians asked each other, what is the basis of the ultimatum? We didn't feel the accusation was right. None of us could explain how Malapi got killed exactly. Were they really going to drop bombs on Surabaya? This was the question that was on our minds, on their minds at that time. But yeah, the British really bombed Surabaya. So about 10,000 to 15,000 Indonesians got killed. The Battle of Surabaya lasted for about 3 weeks. It was very brutal. If you think the war is according to the rules of engagement, it wasn't. Even until now, the Buku train station is the location only 300 meters from the central Surabaya hospital at that time. The British bombed the train which take refugee from this hospital. Even until now, if you go to the Buku hospital, we still can see the remains, the bullet holes, the sharp nail, it's still there. David Well, on his book The Birth of Indonesia, wrote, in the city center, the fighting was more fierce. The street had to be occupied one by one, from one door to another. The corpses of men and horses and cats and dogs lay in the ditches. There was no fighting in the Republic rank to compare with Surabaya, either in courage and intensity. And how we keep commemorating this event, to keep the memory collective stay sharp from generation to generation, is by doing this event. It's called Parade Surabaya Juang. It's held annually, year by year, by organized by our community, Rodebrug Surabaya, but also we invite many reenactment communities in Indonesia, not only Java. So it's just like in the past, from Kalimantan, from Bali, they come and join. So this is the pictures. You can see how we did do the reenactment, as they play a role as the British, as Gurkhas. And yeah, the veterans also there. Okay, that's from me about Battle of Surabaya. Thank you so much.
Ady Setyawan, thank you so much for the explanation of the first weeks and months of this period. I would now like to welcome Marjolein van Pagee. She's a Dutch historian and writer whose previous book was called Banda, The Genocide of Jan Pieterszoon Koen. And she now has written a new book, which has been presented this week. It's called Bung Tomo and the Revolution of 1945. And as Ady already introduced to us Bung Tomo, he's a hero in Indonesia. Marjolein, in your book, you are trying to understand the disconnect between the Dutch memories of Bung Tomo and the Indonesian perception, on the other hand, and the role of him in the revolution. Welcome. Thank you for being here. First of all, why do you wanted to write this book?
Yeah, there was a personal experience. So I once attended one of these reenactments in 2014. I know Ady already for a long time. I think it goes back to 2010. But in 2014, I was there, and I was asked to play Ketu Tantri. Mm-hmm. So that's actually it was an American Scottish woman who was already before the war in Indonesia on Bali, and she chose. So in this time of making choices, she chose the side of the Republic. And she was doing the radio as well, huh? And she joined Bung Tomo on the radio. So in 2014, because I'm also a white woman, they asked me, "Can you read what she did?" So I was there with an actor on a stage in Surabaya. And I received a note and I read it. And then there were many pictures taken, videos, and it circulated online. And then, remarkably, from the Netherlands, I got a lot of negative response. And there was one, it was a journalist, and she wrote, I think it was like a review of another book, an online review of another book, in which she paid like one paragraph attention to my action there. And she said, "How can you dare to stand and to pose next to a war criminal like Bung Tomo?" And that made me, make the choice that I thought, okay, let me find out who was Bung Tomo and what is about this image that we have of him here. Yeah.
Sutomo, also his name, 1920, 1981. Can you just give us a little bit insight on his background? What sort of person are we talking about?
Yeah, he was, I think you could say, middle class in Surabaya. He did receive some education, but as during colonial times, it was limited. So for Indonesian people, because of this apartheid system, it was not common for Indonesian people to go to enjoy education. But he did receive like they call it inlander, which is a racist term. The school for inlanders. He completed the primary education, but he could not complete the secondary education. But during the Japanese occupation, he became second in rank of the Domai, that was the hoe zeg je dat, de ANP,
the news agency?
Yeah, the news agency. And that's when he could climb up quite, he had a job, so he could do something in that time.
And then he developed himself.
Exactly,
right.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit in the way in which Bung Tomo is perceived in the Netherlands? Because that's another story, I think.
Yeah, that's absolutely different story, and it's very sensitive here. And that's, I already explained the reaction of this reviewer who was like saying that how dare I stand next to somebody who, was a war criminal. So here I think he's not commonly known.
Mm-hmm.
But most people here don't even know their history, right? So in general, most Dutch people have not much knowledge on colonial history in general, let alone on Bung Tomo. But in, let's say, communities that are linked to Indonesia, that have a history there, Bung Tomo is more than known, and he is, perceived as sort of as the personification of all the suffering that people endured in that time. So they hold him accountable for many murders that took place in that time, which in the Netherlands is referred to as de Bersiap.
So on one hand, we are talking about a war hero, and on the other hand, from the Dutch perspective, it's really a terrorist, someone who is responsible for a lot of gruels. Then, of course, you start researching, and you're going into more depth research about the role Bung Tomo has been played, particularly in the events of the so-called Simpang Club. Can you tell us a little bit more? What was his role? What did you find out?
Yeah, so first, Ady already mentioned in his lecture about Haryo Kecik. Haryo Kecik was a veteran that we interviewed, and he actually emphasized that Bung Tomo was not that important. He was important because he, maybe like a influencer today on social media.
Right.
He could. He managed to invite a lot of Indonesian youth to come to Surabaya and to reject the reoccupation. So that is I think nobody will deny that. That's very important. But in military terms, he did not contribute himself. So he was the one that you could say encouraged others to
communicator.
Resist. Yeah, he was the voice of the revolution. But in that, he was very famous. So everybody, maybe people didn't, in the beginning, people didn't even recognize his face, but they recognized his voice. They knew that every day he was giving a very, we will listen to some audio tape.
Should we do it now?
Yeah, you can hear the...
We go back to 1945.
Merdeka! Saudara-saudara, rakyat jelata di seluruh Indonesia, terutama saudara-saudara penduduk kota Surabaya. Kita semuanya telah mengetahui bahwa hari ini tentara Inggris telah menyebarkan pamflet-pamflet yang memberikan suatu ancaman kepada kita semua. Kita diwajibkan untuk dalam waktu yang mereka tentukan menyerahkan senjata-senjata yang telah kita rebut dari tangannya tentara Jepang. Mereka telah minta supaya kita datang pada mereka itu dengan mengangkat tangan. Mereka telah minta supaya kita semua datang pada mereka itu dengan membawa bendera putih, tanda bahwa kita menyerah kepada mereka. Saudara-saudara, di dalam pertempuran-pertempuran yang lampau, kita sekalian telah menunjukkan bahwa rakyat Indonesia di Surabaya Maluku, pemuda-pemuda yang berasal dari Sulawesi, pemuda-pemuda yang berasal dari Pulau Bali, pemuda-pemuda yang berasal dari Kalimantan, pemuda-pemuda dari seluruh Sumatera, pemuda Aceh, pemuda Tapanuli, dan seluruh pemuda Indonesia yang ada di Surabaya ini, di dalam pasukan-pasukan mereka masing-masing, dengan pasukan-pasukan rakyat yang dibentuk di kampung-kampung, telah menunjukkan satu pertahanan yang tidak bisa dijebol, telah menunjukkan satu kekuatan. Saudara-saudara rakyat Surabaya, siaplah, keadaan genting. Tetapi saya peringatkan sekali lagi, jangan mulai menembak. Baru kalau kita ditembak, maka kita akan ganti menyerang mereka itu. Kita tunjukkan bahwa kita ini adalah benar-benar orang yang ingin merdeka.
What I think is very striking is that he sort of really recognized the threat of the British, and he knew we have to fight back, otherwise we will be a colonial state again. So that's very clear. But he also, we have heard already, knew that you have to fight the 30,000 British troops. So he was taking a big risk at the time. How do you look upon that he was sort of scaling in the risks?
Yeah, I think not just he, but I think the spirit in the city of Surabaya at that time was very revolutionary. It was like Ady already mentioned, it was enough is enough. And I think that is something that is not often not acknowledged here or not understood here very well, that we are talking about an occupation that took like 350 years. So here we had the occupation of the Germans like for 5 years, and that was already, you know, we were happy that they were going away. So it should not surprise us that the spirit and the readiness of Indonesians, even though they knew that this was an imperial army with, in that time, modern weapons that they could. What could they do? Yes, they took some Japanese arms, but they were not like well trained. Sometimes they even didn't know. Haryoke Chik told us that sometimes these young Indonesian boys who were ready to fight didn't even know how to operate the grenades. Sometimes they exploded in their hands because they didn't know how it worked. And you can imagine that. Yeah. So actually it's interesting that Bung Tomo, who is here seen as a very bad person with no feelings or something, that he, after the war, felt responsible for all the Indonesian youth that he encouraged to fight and that died. Right. So he made a tour after the war throughout East Java to pay visit to all these graveyards and to also ask for forgiveness, because he felt that, he felt somehow responsible, but I think he was not the one responsible for their deaths. That's the colonial armies. And
then, of course, we also have to talk about the violence that was aimed at civilians, especially the KNIL, the Royal Netherlands East Indies Armies, and their families. A lot of also Dutch Indonesian people who lived at the time there. The British came in, as they say, to protect them. What do you think about that violence, what was exposed?
I think it's... I don't know if we have the quote from Frans Fanon. I asked that from the beginning, but it's a logical consequence if you are coming with violence. So I think that's it's almost like 1 and 1 is 2. You know, like. We have to understand that the initiative of the occupation is coming from this side of the world. They came with violence from the beginning. My first book about Banda already explains that in detail, how that went already in 1600. So after so many years, it's just a logical consequence. And violence is the result of something that, so it's like, what you reap is what you, or no, what you sow is what is it?
So what you sow is what you reap.
Yeah,
what you reap is,
that's saying.
Yeah, you reap what you sow.
Yeah. But that part seems, often not really I see a lot of misunderstanding in the Dutch colonial, or in the Dutch historiography in general.
Well, we had a very recent study, Het geluid van geweld, the resonance of violence. And it was calculated that around 6,000 Indo-European people were the victim of anti-colonial violence. The majority of them civilians. Do you think that is justified in relation to the fact that revolutionary action was needed?
Yeah, what strikes me is that in most cases, I read the book. I also know the writers. Actually, we invited one of the conductors of this research, and eventually he didn't want to join us for the discussion. Actually, it was very difficult to find people who wanted to debate us here, just for you to know. But in that book, what I find remarkable is that it is, so they keep using the word bersiap. They defend this term, which I think is a colonial term. It is an Indonesian word, bersiap, but in Indonesia it doesn't mean what it means here. And so it's a Dutch colonial invention to sort of, often to describe this violence as where two parties fight, there are two to blame, as if there is a sort of equality in that. I disagree with that. Also, what I find remarkable is that the violence is often lumped together. So you have, I think, important distinctions between violence. You have violence that was necessary to defend the newborn, the independent state of Indonesia, and that is all lumped together under the bersiap, as if all Indonesians just were out of their minds and just out of nothing, without reason, started to attack Indo-Europeans, Dutch, and other collaborators of the Dutch. This is not true. There was a lot of, there was a need to defend the state, the independent state of Indonesia, with using violence. Otherwise, the occupation would just happen. And besides that, there were indeed also cases of, let's say, of revenge, so hate crimes that were maybe not really necessary to defend the newborn state. But also in that case, we have to include, that's what I just said, it's like 1 and 1 is 2. It's like we have to include, where does this originate? Where does this come from?
You also write in your book ways to address in the way we talk about anti-colonial violence and how we discuss this in the Netherlands, if there is a discussion at all, I think. But how do you perceive that? How do you think we talk about this in the Netherlands?
I find it very hard that I'm happy that we have this here now. Let's hope this can be a start of this. But I think the problem here is that there is a lack of an Indonesian representation, and also even if we will. There are Indonesians in the Netherlands, but there is not often in discussions. It is not people do not realize that what it means that we don't have a big Indonesian representation, and we do not really understand then what the consequence of that is for the debate.
We lack that voice.
We lack it. We lack the voice, but we don't even notice that the voice isn't there. And we often, of course, that is more for, let's say, for white Dutch people, that we do not even distinguish. We don't even know the difference between Indies and Indonesian. Why for an Indonesian it's very difficult or annoying even, I think, to constantly being confused with the Indies community, which is a very different community than being Indonesian and being from the Republic of Indonesia.
On the other hand, we see that the consensus has become, also in the Netherlands, that the Netherlands was on the wrong side of history. If not for the whole colonial project, then at least for sending the army in 1946. But do you understand that your book can feel like you are trying to take away the grief of victims who have been on the other side, especially the Indian people, the Indische people, like you already mentioned? How do you consider that? How do you sort of understand why it's painful for some mostly Indo-European people to have this perspective?
First, let me acknowledge that yes, when they arrived here, for most Dutch people, they also did not understand their position. No. Most Dutch people had no idea. So I acknowledge that they experienced racism from the Dutch, from the white Dutch people. That's why I understand that it must feel also frustrated and etc. But we can. in these recent years, when there is more and more attention also for the Indies community, like even I think a few years ago, the Dutch government made like some million, was it 20 million euros available to recognize the Indies community. Mm-hmm. So let that sink in. You cannot have the discussion with only, so there was a hierarchy, and I think we need
a hierarchy of pain, of feelings.
There was a hierarchy, a racist hierarchy that existed in the colony, and that is still visible here in the representation of Indies versus Indonesians versus Maluku people. That apartheid system that was invented from the 1850s onwards, of course, the laws are not here, but the effect and the way that you can see it back in the representation of groups, and I think that's the. So it's sort of
still echoing that same sort of thinking and systematic way of approaching different groups.
Yeah, and then because you asked, do I know that it may be hard for people from, let's say, from Indo-European background? Yes, of course I understand, but I cannot just, I think, let me tell it this way. I remember that Jeffrey Ponda, who is also present here, he often says, like, Indies people are collaborators, and people get angry. And he also told me, like, you should also mention that. And I hesitated because I felt racist. I felt, can I say that? It will be racist from me to say that. But I thought about it, and I thought, is it not even more racist? I saw people, even in front of Jeffrey Ponda, defending, so it's white people defending Indo-European people in front of an Indonesian. You understand? Mm-hmm. This is also racist. So I thought, like, I think all of us have the responsibility to really comprehend what was the effect of this three-layered apartheid system, and me, as being a white historian, also can explain that and can acknowledge the different layers and the different pain that come with that.
So, as you said, it's very important that we are aware of all those layers and all those perspectives, and that you can call this still a colonial way of thinking and approaching. That's important. Back to Bung Tomo, because how is he perceived in Indonesia today? Is he still sort of celebrated as a hero? Is it someone who is still a big name?
Yeah, he's. Everybody knows his name at least, and maybe, of course, like in every country, you have people like Ady Setyawan who love history, and you have people who think like, history is that really interesting? But everybody at least knows his name, and you see there are many T-shirts with his face on it. It is a very, very famous figure. Yeah.
And you say he has been reflecting after the war on his role, especially towards young Indonesians he has sent into that war. Did you also find any document about he himself reflecting upon the victims on the other sides? Is that something he perceived or discussed?
No, not that I read, but yes, he did. For example, because that is he was accused. There are two accusations. The first accusation is that he was present in the Simpang Club and that he even committed these killings on Indo-Europeans and other people. He wrote his memoir, and he reflects on that. So he did see it. He says he didn't find this okay, and that he reported it. Right. But it's not, and that he himself, his story is, and other accounts confirm that he was himself taken to that place by his fellow Indonesians. So they interrogated him there because, he was quite not a stranger, but he was. He set up his own group, and some of his fellow Indonesians wondered, like from the PRI, the one that located in Simpang Club, they were like, what is he up to? And then they took him from his home and interrogated him there, where he witnessed what also happened there.
So, as always, if you focus, history is always more complicated than you think from the outside, even on this level. Well, Marjolein, thank you so much for bringing this on the table and for writing the book. You will be on the first row, listening and also reflecting. Give her a big hand, Marjolein. Thank you so much. Before we will go to the panel discussion, I would like to introduce Robin Raven. Robin is a Dutch author and children's book writer. Well known here in the Netherlands. He wrote various books on Indonesia, among others a book on Surapati. And he also wrote De Laatste Reis van Garuda, The Last Journey to Garuda, which deals with the Japanese imprisonment camps, the anti-colonial violence, and the journey back to the Netherlands through the eyes of two children. And he made a family audio tour for the exhibition Revolutie at the Dutch Rijksmuseum. We have asked him to reflect on the history from an Indo-European perspective. Give him a big hand. Welcome, Robin. And you will give a presentation.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. First of all, Ady, thank you very much for sharing your story with us. That's another story that I haven't heard of in school. So thank you for that. Congratulations on your new book. I'm very excited about the book, and you know that because we talked to each other 2 months ago at the publisher's office, and you told me you were going to write a book about him, Buku Bung Tomo. And I thought it fantastic because we are together at the same publisher, Omniboek. And last year I published Surapati, which is a story about a man who grows from a slave to a ruler, and he fights the VOC and the colonial of the collaborators, I must say. And this year we've got Bung Tomo. So we've got two Indonesian national heroes, departed from each other from 250 years, but two very important persons. And the funny thing is, I started asking around young people and old people about Bung Tomo. Young people didn't know him. Nobody knew him. And I can understand that because Bung Tomo never pops up in school books or in films or whatever. So I asked a lot of old people, and some of them knew Bung Tomo, but he didn't come out very positive. He is a very, you already mentioned it, he's a very controversial figure for a lot of Dutch people. They call him a loudmouth. Somebody who shouted and screamed and said, what did he do? He set up the Indonesian people against the English and against the Dutch. Why? This is an awful man. So now I'm happy you wrote this book because you're going to look at it from a different side, and maybe, I hope a lot of people will change their minds, or maybe change a little bit of their minds. Okay, I was asked to tell a little story about my parents from my past. They gave me 10 minutes, so I will start with it now. My mother is the child of a German mother and a Dutch father, born in Manado in 1935. And my father, who died 6 years ago, was an Indo-European man, born in Sukabumi on Java. They met after the war in Holland. They married and they had 2 children. My brother and I were raised in a world of rice tables, Asian markets, superstition, and Malaysian words like obat, adu, suda, and tolol. And when it concerned business unsuitable for my ears, my parents would stop talking in Dutch and continue in Malaysian. Why did they do that? They didn't tell. I didn't ask. It was only in the 70s of the last century that something inside of me was awoken. On television, there was a program called The Late Late Lien Show. It ran for 2 seasons and was made by the famous Dutch singer and actress Wieteke van Dort. She created a so-called kumpulan, a cozy get-together of people from the Dutch East Indies who told stories, did sketches, and sang old and new songs. Millions of people saw the shows, and they loved it. People like my parents. They laughed their heads off at seeing all those recognizable scenes. I saw it too. I thought the jokes were pretty bad, but I was young and I was into other things. Still, I watched the programs with my parents, and they got me started to read about the Dutch East Indies and Indonesia. I started asking questions. Where were you born, Mum? What did Grandpa do for work? How was your relationship with the Indonesian people? How did you survive the camps? But there were no answers. Nobody wanted to talk about the past. My grandmother, in the first place, she was quite bitter about the past, especially about the Japanese occupation. When I bought her an electric kettle for her birthday, she turned it down because it was made in Japan. It took almost until her death before she finally started talking. Thankfully, my mother was less reluctant. It took me a lot of wine, but the fruits of the vine opened up a closed trunk that had been on lock for years, gathering dust. But when it opened, stories flew around the room. My mother told me of her youth in the Dutch East Indies, the happiness she felt as a young child. But she also told about the camps she was in, and of the period after the camps. Release after 3.5 years didn't mean freedom. The world had changed. On August 17, 1945, Sukarno and Hatta had declared the proclamatie. Most of the Dutch people didn't see that coming. They thought they had everything under control. Mind you, Indonesian political parties in the first half of the 20th century were kept an eye on and were kept short by the Dutch colonial government. To give you an example, the outspoken Sukarno was banned twice. After the proclamatie, the situation drastically changed. If my mother wanted to go to the store, somebody had to go with her. On her way, she was scolded at, spit at, and sometimes boys and girls of her age threw stones at her. One day, she came home with a big bruise. "I tripped over a stone," she said. It was a lie, and her mother knew it. Everywhere in the city were flags, new flags. Not the usual ones, but red and white, merah putih, the flag of the Republic Indonesia, the colors of a new era. At night, my 11-year-old mother could not sleep because of the noises outside, the sound of wood ticking against the telegraph poles. Sometimes roaring crowds passed the house, singing, shouting, and throwing stones against the windows. All this scared the hell out of my mother. Every time she heard the crowds coming, she crept under the bed. She grabbed her hair, wet herself, and hid until the sounds stopped. Another memory. She says, "One day I went to the water well with my mother. When we arrived, suddenly a group of young Indonesian boys appeared. They didn't speak. They looked angry, and every one of them had a bamboo runcing spear in his hand. My mother started talking to one of the boys. He was surprised that she spoke his language. You could see that in his face. The boy started talking to his friends. It took some time, and it looked as they were quarreling. But then the boy made a gesture and said that we could leave. I was so scared, I thought I was going to die. But that unknown boy probably saved our lives that day." But there were other stories, like the one of the 25-year-old Anna Sophia Uhlenbusch. Together with her 2 sisters, her father, her mother, and 10 people of the staff, she was brutally murdered by the Pemuda on October 11th, 1945. They were taken to the sugar factory, slaughtered and cut into pieces. and they were not the only ones. When my mother tells me the story of the water well, she starts to cry. Although she is over 80 years old, she still remembers every detail of the scene. From that moment on, she says, I have never been scared in my life. Why? Because when you cross a certain border of fear, there is nothing left. And I understand that. Although nothing physically happened, for her, the scene at the water well was perhaps worse than all the terrible scenes that she saw in the camps, when the Japanese guards beat up the Dutch women and humiliated them as they were nothing more than animals. These were the images my mother took with her on the boat to Holland when she was 12, alone, only with a so-called uncle she had never seen before. Imagine the loneliness this young girl must have felt, leaving everyone and everything behind for an unknown future. My mother was a so-called repatriant. Patria means fatherland. That's a strange term. My mother wasn't returning to her fatherland, she was leaving her fatherland. That's her story. No, it's not just her story. It's the story of 10,000s of mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. All had to leave the land they thought was their homeland. Don't forget, all the old people who are with us now, who are living today, were youngsters at the time. They were babies, they were children and teenagers. Their youth was taken away from them by a twist of fate. They had to leave paradise. Their youth ended when they entered the Japanese concentration camps. From that moment on, their world turned from color to black and white. And after that, what was their future in their new land? A land they only knew out of school books. A land that wasn't even waiting for them. My father was an Indo-European man. During the war, as a 14-year-old boy, he had to work 24 hours a day to keep his family alive. And when they came to Holland, it was freezing cold. They had to share a house with 4 other Indonesian families. They had to pay a lot of money. They were not allowed to cook. The owner didn't like the oriental smells. And they could only use the shower once a week. School was a nightmare. My father was called names. He was a blackie, he was a peanut, he was a shit Chinese rice eater. So my father started to fight. But the headmaster at school didn't punish the white bullies, but my father. Maybe he could fight in Indonesia between the apes, but not here in this civilized country. A female teacher once asked my father what it was like to live, or to wear a pair of trousers, and how does it feel to live in a house made of stone. But he kept quiet. All his life he carried on. He married my mother, had me and my brother, and got a job. He didn't talk about the past. What's the use, he said. Sudah, laat maar.
Are you almost there, Roman? Because we're running out of time a little bit.
Because, okay.
Ik heb er nog een 1,5 tot 2 minuten max. Dus je moet concluderen.
Ja, ik ga er een klein stukje uithalen. Helemaal goed. Why am I telling you this? Because in spite of all that has happened, nor my mother, nor my father held a grudge against the Indonesian people, or the Japanese for that matter, or even the Dutch for the way they treated people from the Dutch East Indies. What they went through was a human conflict that can only be overcome by looking into each other's eyes and recognize each other's stories and pain. Ja, niemand wilde komen, maar ik wel.
Ga door.
Forget the word but. The word but implies a contradiction. We do this, but hey, they do that. Contradictions solve nothing. Use the word and instead. And implies equality on each side. A does this and B does that. Nor A nor B has the monopoly on suffering. But can we do that? Can we surpass the barriers of emotion? Looking at the world today, that sounds like an impossibility. But I believe in the impossible possibility. What else are we here for on this planet? Thank you.
Robin Raven, thank you so much. Robin, please take a seat.
Yeah.
And I would also like Ady Setyawan to take a seat, and Fitriya Jalita. And especially Fitriya, I would welcome you warmly here in the panel.
Thank you.
You are an Indonesian-Dutch journalist, a writer, a radio host, and you are working for the Dutch public broadcasting organization NOS. Very welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start with the story of Robin. It looks like being between the hammer and the anvil as an Indonesian coming to the Netherlands in the late 40s, 50s. What do you think of that sort of perception of what happened?
I think it's a story that many of us here in the Netherlands have known. I think it must be nice to be able to tell your story as such, to be able to personify the people, to humanize the people that are actually being called characters in your story. Mm-hmm. Because in Surabaya, there were like more than 15,000 people that are dead. Where are their humanization? And yes, you can tell me that's the responsibility of Indonesians and not ours. But it also has to do with perception, doesn't it? If you humanize one group over another, you will feel more sympathy over one group against another. Mm-hmm. And that makes a lot of things impossible.
Is that what happened over the last years?
Yes, definitely. Yeah. That is definitely what happened.
Yeah.
And now we're finally making amends, if you will. Mm-hmm. Finally, we're trying to catch up with the group of people that have been dehumanized, that have been glossed over so many years.
Yeah.
And with the book of Marjolein, I already told Marjolein about it. It felt like I was healing my inner child because I have been living in Indonesia until I was 8, and I came here in the Netherlands because of my father's work. I'm Indonesian, so I have been raised Indonesian. Both my parents are
your parents are Indonesian,
exactly.
And you grew up in the Netherlands.
My father is Sulawesian, from Sulawesi. Yeah. My mother is Javanese. Yeah. Because a lot of people don't understand the concept of being Indonesian. It's a nationality, not an ethnicity. Just like Indies is not a nationality. Or not, well, it's not a country, so no, it's not a nationality. Also, it's not an ethnicity. Mm-hmm. It's a political identity. Mm-hmm. Just like Indonesian is a political identity. But we do have our country. So there you go.
Okay, and then I think it's very interesting to understand your perception in regards to what Robin's saying. People were leaving their country into what they called their motherland, which wasn't theirs at all because they were never been there, not born there. Well, how do you look upon that?
Well, they relate to the white people. They relate to colonizers. So then, yes, that's your motherland if you feel more related to the colonizers.
In relation to the bloodline or the nationality? Or
also, of course, because there were people who were married to Dutch people or had children with Dutch people, and then, indigenous people. But we all, the indigenous people, all came from the Southeast Asian archipelago. I keep saying this. Right. Because we keep saying, in Dutch history telling, we keep saying about former Dutch East Indies, but we never make the notation that is the term that is used by the colonizer, not by the colonized.
Right.
So if you want to move away from that, if you want to be objective or neutral, then you say Southeast Asian archipelago, because that is what it is, and what it was, and what it still is.
Okay. I think you have a very unique position, because living in the Netherlands...
I would say it's
difficult, but for tonight, a very, I think, unique and very interesting position. To compare the narratives about this period. Yeah. What do you think is the biggest difference in terms of perception between what you see in the Netherlands and in Indonesia?
Okay, I can go on about this forever, but let's keep it short, right?
Try to focus.
Right? I think the fundamental difference of the Indonesian perspective of Dutch colonial history in Indonesia, the country I was born, the fundamental difference lies in the fact that the Dutch justify colonialism. And Indonesia is, I mean, it was created out of anti-colonial resistance. We had to fight for our liberation. So then there is no room to justify colonization, Western imperialism. There is no room to justify that. And if you look over the contents of the history, of the perspectives, that is something that you will instantly notice if you speak both languages. And I'm not just saying speak both languages, like speak Dutch and Indonesian, but speak the language of the oppressed and the language of the oppressor.
Okay, let's zoom a little bit in on the stir we had last year on the exhibition in Indonesia. Yeah. I think that's a very interesting example on how the different perspectives are being felt. This was, I think, stirred up because of the term bersiap. We already mentioned that. Can you tell us what in your perspective, happened around that exhibition? What do you think stirred such an emotional debate?
Well, first of all, it was the historian Boni Triana who actually mentioned, and actually I was one of the first people he told to that he was not going to use the term bersiap. It's not going to be in the exhibition. And I was scratching behind my ears and I was like, are you serious right now? I don't think that's going to happen, sir. I'm sorry, that's never going to happen. You're in the Netherlands and you're telling me you're making an exhibition about colonial history without mentioning bersiap? No, that's not going to happen. And I'm sorry to say, but I was right. They threw him under the bus. And they said, we don't have anything to do with that. That's his opinion. That's not our opinion. We don't want to hurt anyone here. You know, we're just being neutral, objective. So we say bersiap. But then I talked to many other historians about bersiap. I talked to, I mean, actually last September, I was in Indonesia myself. I'm researching the book that I'm writing right now about Indonesian perspectives of Dutch colonial history, seen from the perspective of my family history. A history of resistance, where both the violent and the collaborative resistance can coexist. And
this is where your book is also.
This is where
focusing.
my book exactly. This is where I will focus on because, yeah. Well, and I actually spoke to the general director of the Ministry of Education and Culture in Indonesia, and I asked him, "Don't we have like a response to this bersiap?" They say. And he says, I'm sorry, but that just doesn't really exist if they only talk of the violence that so-called Indonesian freedom fighters or pemudas, if they like to talk. Pemudas just means youngsters. We still use this word. So why do you weaponize it? But anyway, it's just a word. And when you only refer in bersiap to the violence that Indonesians, freedom fighters, supposedly caused to the Indo-Dutch, then that's racist. Because seriously, Indonesians were also being attacked by everyone for almost 350 years. I mean, there has been debate about that, but definitely over 3 centuries. And you know what? What I notice here is that when it comes to bersiap, it's a fragmentation of history. And what I notice is that the works of a lot of historians nowadays only focus on 1945 and 1949. Why is that? Because...
And you mean not before?
Not before.
Go back.
No. But also not like, why don't you relate it to everything? I mean, it's being done little by little, but then you come back to 1945, 1949. Why? You say you forget the bigger picture in a way. Yes. Well, purposefully so. Yes. Okay. And I actually brought a picture of, and relating to the first question you asked me about the major difference between Dutch and Indonesian perspectives of colonial history, I would like to show that picture. It's a picture of 2 of these paintings that I noticed. I don't know if, I think maybe many Indonesians know this picture. This picture over here is it's a painting by Nicholas Pieneman about the arrest of Pangeran Diponegoro, Prince Diponegoro of Javanese. I guess a lot of Dutch people recognize this one. And that one is the same picture, but painted by an Indonesian. This one is, exactly, Raden Saleh. This one is painted by an Indonesian. That one is painted by the Dutch. What do you see here? Isn't it telling already? Isn't it telling? Like, because at this painting, you see Diponegoro kind of startled. It's a scene about the arrest. So he surrenders after he started the war and rallied up, and then he became arrested. And that's the painting over here. And you see him being startled. And then over here in Raden Saleh, you see him holding his head up high. I'm sorry, can I finish? Thank you. Over here, you see the painting by Raden Saleh, and the Indonesian. And this is actually a resistance movement, because he is painting the Dutch. If you look more closely, he's painting the Dutch without any depth. It's kind of like it's plastered on there. But the Indonesians, you see over there, the oppressed, they have shadow, they have depth. They are not one-dimensional. And that is what you have always done in your history telling about Indonesians. We're always one-dimensional. Women are always either objectified or weak or pitiful, but never resistant.
Did you say you against him?
No. Dutch. The Dutch.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I said that because
no,
he's
no,
Dutch, isn't he?
I think it's very good. So you already expressed the feeling itself indirectly, and I think it's very well pointed that for the first time you show this picture. It's the first time I see it. You make it perfectly right. The white men are flat, so he turned the picture totally.
Exactly. Yeah. And also,
first time. For sure.
This picture, actually, this one, it was on my history book.
Right.
So I had to look at it for years.
Yes.
And I asked my history teacher, what about the Indonesians? Have you ever thought about them? He actually shrugged.
Of
so,
course.
Mr. Willems, if you're watching, I'm going to change that.
I watch it. Petria, thank you so much. Ady, how do you listen to this? You're an historian. Is the term bersiap of any meaning in today's Indonesia?
In Indonesia, if you ask just randomly to people, what is bersiap? Maybe they just don't know. It's just a word which means be prepared. That's it. But in revolution, hindi ide.
No.
I think, not maybe. You just do it randomly. You don't have to go to Indonesia. We have social media. Just ask your friends from there, from Indonesia. It's unknown. So for us, it's very absurd. What is bersiap? A period? If it's a period, then from when till when? Who's the victim? If it's a period, it's a time. What about the Surabaya people who just brutally bombed by the British? 15,000 killed. Are they also part of the bersiap period? If it's a period, if they're not, isn't it racism? Think about it. It's very absurd.
And what would be your advice to a museum like the National Rijksmuseum here in the Netherlands in regards to using this term?
Yeah. There was no term such as bersiap Indonesia, or you want to use this term, that term, so be it. But you must also explain how Indonesia see it. Because for us, for me especially, it's racist. Because I know the story, the whole stories.
Right. Okay, and then, because we are all talking about pain tonight, the pain of the racist feeling, the pain of being wiped out of history or making it flat. And then in regards what I consider becoming between the hammer and the anvil, the group Roman is talking about. How do you perceive that?
Talking about the pain, I read a lot about the pain, what happened during the Japanese occupation, and then after that, out from the hell to another hell, revolution. But have you ever think what happened 100 years before that? For us, for Indonesian, all of you have daughter, son, grandson, granddaughter, 5 years old, or maybe little sister. Imagine those pure soul, you walk with them, and then they ask you, verboden voor honden and inlander. Why? Why they see us as animal? Imagine your daughter, imagine just your daughter asking you that question. How struck is that? That's only for, it's just one example. How they dehumanize us.
And Robin, how do you look upon that? Because your grandmothers were, of course, referring to as we were sort of wiped out of paradise.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, you said, okay, I recognize the pain of the people who had to go to Holland, but, then we get the word but, do you realize what happened with our people for 350 years? I would say not but and also that, because what happened to my mother and all those other people is terrible. It scarred them for life. But what happened to the Indonesians scarred them for 350 years. And I absolutely recognize that. And I think it's very important not to get tangled into a battle of terminology.
It's in English. It's in English. Maar ga even door, Robin. Please continue.
In my opinion, pain is pain. And of course, I recognize the pain. What did the Dutch do there? Let's start with that. Yeah. You know, yeah. It's only one thing. Jan Pieter Koen, he said it was trade is war and war is trade. And I can completely understand that, but yeah, I cannot change that.
Yeah,
I mean, the king, he can say, I'm sorry, but
yeah, Ady, because then we come more in the now.
Yeah,
I mean, we cannot change history.
You cannot. But again, like I said, and Marjolein said, in 1945 is the year of choice. You can have your choice. All of you, all people in the Netherlands, majority, talking about the bad situation from Indo's perspective. But do you know that we in Indonesia also have the Indo who choose part as Indonesian? They fight for Indonesian. Yeah. They fight for freedom in 1945 in Surabaya. We know in our history book, we know Nono Corford who died in the fight.
Ady, are you saying the Dutch sort of missed the opportunity in 1945?
Purposefully so.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Dutch missed the opportunity in the first 20, 30 years of the 20th century. Because the Indonesian political parties were coming on strong, but they were cut short all the time. That was the time, the first half of the 20th century, when it had to be done, but it didn't happen.
Right. So they missed it twice.
Yeah.
On the historical side. Okay.
And they never saw it coming.
We let that sink in for a moment.
Yeah.
I think, Mr. Pondaag, if you ask a question in English, I can give you the mic, like the rest, because it's almost 9:15. So if there are already questions, I would give the possibility, but others we will continue with the panel. Are there now, on this very moment, yes? In English. Dan gaan we een vertaling doen. Dan moet je met het in Nederlands zeggen, dan probeer ik te vertalen.
Kijk, het wordt zo met gemak over Indonesië gesproken. Ik heb aan Esther Captain gevraagd. Tenminste, Esther Captain heeft met mij interview gedaan in verband met het boek Bersiap. Maanden, zelfs een jaar lang, hebben ze met mij bezig geweest. En op een gegeven moment is ze weg. Ik heb gezegd tegen haar, als je dat wilt doen...
Wat is de vraag?
Wat je wilt doen. Omdat ik vind dat het racistisch is, dat Bersiap.
He says the term Bersiap in itself is a racist term. Do you agree? And why? Can you explain that for...
Yes, because of the context I just said. I mean, if you mean it to say that it's only Indonesians that were attacking the Indo-Dutch people, then it's racist, because Indonesians were also being attacked at the same period. I mean, what has been said about the torture in the Japanese camps, my grandfather, who was Javanese, he was inside that camp too. Why? Because he looked white. But he's Indonesian. I mean, he chose to be Indonesian afterwards. That's why Ady said there's a moment of choice here. And let's not gloss over that.
Okay, we keep that in mind. Ik ga even wat andere mensen de kans geven. I saw a question over there too.
Het moet uitgelegd worden.
Ja, dat zijn we aan het doen. Okay, please. I give...
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, my name is Vino. I have quite complicated background because my grandpa, he was a Japanese. He came to Indonesia as Kempetai. Actually, my great-grandpa was the five of the spionage who sent a Japanese to Indonesia, and he was in the Sumatra. But then I want to talk about my second grandpa. So my grandpa came in Indonesia as Kempetai, and he also thought the Indonesian youngster to be in Peta. And then he came to Indonesia as the Japanese said, like, you know, Japan is the friends of Asia. Japan is the, in Indonesian history, we call it the 3A, 3A. But then the reality was not there. And then he was so not really agree with that Romusa. So he chose side. He joined the PETA and he with the resistance army, whom he also trained, and he also has this death threat because he betrayed his country.
And so, what is your sort of question or remark to the talk we have?
I recognize the pain of sorry, I forgot your name. Robin, because in my school, every time they know that I was part of Japan, they always like hitting me, kicking me away. Your grandpa is like brutally murdered my grandma, and your grandpa like raping my grandma, something like that. Well, in Japan they have jugunyanfu. So I remember, but then I agree with you that in the time of the choosing side, my grandpa chose a side to be Indonesian.
Can I sort of translate this? That in the moment you have to choose side, and you have a multicultural background like you are in trouble anyway.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
And also, I want to cite that from the side of my Indonesian side, a Japanese grandpa, he almost went to the Suriname, while the Dutch never said about they will bring his friends to Suriname. And then at that time his mother was sick, so his position was changed by his friends.
Even more complicated. Yeah. Okay, we go back to the panel for a moment.
I'll ask the questions.
Okay, then really a question.
Yes, these are the questions.
Maybe that's good for the rest as well. We have to try to stick a little bit to the talk and the question who you want to address.
I think both countries should like sitting each other and try to like recognizing to each side. Okay, this is the fault that we do. This is the fault that they do. And my
okay, so sort of reconciliation.
So my question is, when your parents came to the Netherlands, is there something that the Dutch government back then did for the people who just came, and explain why do they have to came from Indonesia to the Netherlands?
They never spoke about that. They never talked about. They just came and they got a job, and I think the Dutch people who came from Indonesia started talking in the 80s, in the 90s of the last century, and before that time they never talked about things. Even my mother said to me, "Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. I mean, the Jews have had a bad time, so why should I complain?" That's what she said to me.
Okay. We try to end this part, which is really more focused on the Bercia period, and then we like to have a little bit more time also about the last years and the more reconciliation and understanding of the history from today's perspective. Do you have a question on Bercia, on that specific period?
Something about the narrative of history.
Okay, please. I keep the mic.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Sure. Hello, I'm actually Indonesian as well. But as you can see, I'm ethnically Chinese Indonesian. And I have always struggled to find my place in Indonesian history or Dutch history even. So in the end, I can see these debates just highlighting we still need to choose a side. Like the Dutch government seems want to emphasize on Bersia to justify colonization for 100 years. For Indonesia, history is to romanticize and to make a grand narrative of identity, even though we are basically people from different ethnicity, but doesn't have any identity other than being colonized by the Dutch. So do you think there can ever be one common history for the Dutch and Indonesia other than these two polar opposite sides.
Okay. Interesting question. Can you comment on that?
Well, I'm really struggling to figure out what you mean by one common history, because again, history has different perspectives, and I think a lot of different perspectives are equally allowed to exist. So I don't think you can have like one common that we all agree on, and I also don't think that that should be the goal here, because then, you know, we probably need 300 more years to agree with each other. That's not going to happen. And like you said, you know, we are from different ethnical backgrounds, and yet we can still find a common ground. So there are possibilities, but when it's not to be glossed over, when we have clear differences, we should name it as such, and we should recognize it as such.
And do you also recognize what he's saying, that we are now, and from the Indonesian perspective that is, it's now romanticized?
Yes, I totally recognize that. Yes, right. Definitely. I think if you read the book by Bung Tomo, and by Marjolein van Pagee about Bung Tomo, and I can't promote this enough, you should read it, because then you will also find out how it came to be that Indonesian history telling has been revisionized, you know, with the Suharto period, and how it was glossed over, and the roles of the military have been really enlarged. Maybe I shouldn't be saying this with Indonesians watching, but like, it happened. So yeah, definitely, the romanticization is something I recognize and I totally agree with.
I like to go a little bit to the period we're living in now, in the way we perceive the history we are discussing or we're talking about. And especially Fitria, you are very closely watching the debate developing in the Netherlands over the last, well, yes, 10, 20 years.
Watching, rolling my eyes at it.
Rolling your eyes, yeah. Trying to understand the step-by-step approach of the Dutch government.
Mostly rolling my eyes at it.
Of course, we have heard the Dutch perspective changing, right? Mm-hmm. By saying, okay, we were wrong. We made the wrong historical decision. Yes?
No.
Or
extreme violence?
Slightly.
No.
Okay. But today, we also talk about the extreme violence on the other side. Do you think that is something the Dutch sort of can more openly debate, in not only in the perceptive, as we have heard already, that it's the sort of fault of the Indonesians, that they sort of prolonged, therefore, the occupation of the Dutch? Is there more in-depth discussion about this as well?
Yes, of course, there's an in-depth discussion, but then we have to go back to the perspectives of dehumanization for centuries. Right. And I made an example, actually, which I'm still studying right now. Could you show the picture of the two female warriors that I sent you, of Cut Nyak Dien and Raden Ajeng Kartini? So I made these pictures actually last September. It was in Yogyakarta, and it's in Fort Vredenburg, it's called. And did you know that this fort was actually made by the Dutch, right, so that they can look over at the sultanates?
Can you translate the word Vredenburg? Because that's very ironic in this term.
Vredenburg, a peaceful valley,
something like that.
Yeah, it's really weird. But anyway, they made this fort because they wanted to look over the different sultanates that were a part of Yogyakarta, of Javanese era, and they wanted to see where the fights occur, because that is how they could enter divide and conquer strategy and win more ground. And this is something that we never talk about, because we keep talking about 45 and 49 and never how it came to be. So I made these pictures, and I definitely wanted to show them here, is because when we look at the different perspectives, especially the Dutch, but also Indonesian, you know, with the romanticizing, the Dutch tend to glorify historical figures that are good. And what does that mean, good? When they're collaborative. When they're like Raden Ajeng Kartini, which I'm pretty sure most people here know of, because there is Kartini Road, Kartini Lane, Kartini everything here in the Netherlands. But have you heard of Cut Nyak Dien? And why not? Have you ever wondered? Because Kartini was someone who fought against paternalism from Javanese culture. So the paternalistic men who tried to oppress women, well, that's the narrative that we really love to hear about and really love to support. And she actually collaborated with Western intellectuals and females also in order to make things better for the Javanese women. So that is something that we can totally relate, we can totally applaud, and I agree. But Cut Nyak Dien, who was she? She was actually the first warrior. She led an entire army, and a guerrilla army at that, and she was a woman. In her era, have you ever heard of a woman doing that in the Netherlands? I don't know.
Hannie Schaft.
Yeah, I don't know. So, you see that we pick and choose who we want to highlight, and that's normal, that's human, but we need to be able to reflect on that and why that is.
Ady, I think what we're also discussing is coming to terms with our past. And that's not easy. Coming to terms with the 350 years past is even more difficult. Over the last part of the evening, I like to talk with you a little bit more about what you are doing with your reenactment activities, because I think it's very learnable, it's very interesting what you're doing, the way you approach history. Can you explain a little bit more about what you are doing with your organization?
Okay, my community is doing reenactment. You can see the photos and videos from me and Marjolein. That's how we try to keep our collective memories alive. So the new generation can see how it looks like, their uniform, their weapons and everything. And we hope we make them start questioning what the story is about. And then they start to try to find out what happened in the past, to learn. But again, talking about history between Indonesia and Dutch in the past and how we face it nowadays, please think about this. In the past, in 1945, the one you call Persia period and romanticizing history, we are not romanticizing history. We also have bad guys. We have, I think every revolution in every nation, they have a group who try to make benefit for themselves. It happened in us. In Surabaya also, we have Sabarudin. He mentioned about Whittaker van Dort. The father of the Whittaker van Dort beheaded by the Sabarudin. In our historiography, he well known. He killed people, raped women, you name it. But what happened to him? We execute him. But Sutomo, imagine in this Simpang or Simpang society, he also being captured there, interrogated there. And Sumarsono, as the leader of the PRI militia, who captured him, also wrote on his memoir. He admitted that he kidnapped Sutomo. So how come Sutomo become the person behind the killing? The killing took place, it happened by Sabarudin. But please think again. The Dutch need reason to launch their attack to reoccupy Indonesia in 1947. They need good reason as a propaganda. They need, this is terrorist and who's the head of the snake? They want a name that all people know, Sutomo. That's it. If they say, yeah, we have Sabarudin, who know about Sabarudin? It's just a small...
Talking party. About the reenactment you are doing every year, you sort of show, especially to your younger generations, what happened in that period. Do you think that can be something for the Dutch to do as well, to incorporate this sort of reenactment in our own historical approach?
Why not?
Can we learn from that?
Yeah, of course.
I think that we absolutely, as an old teacher, there is so little information about what you told me now about the Surabaya story. It's only about the VOC and the VOC and what they did and how much money they earned and how big they were and how great they were, that they sailed the 7 seas. That was important. But you see, I think in education you see a change, but it goes very, very, very slow.
Yeah.
What do you think, Vitria? Is it something the Dutch could use, this reenactment sort of approach?
So I also grew up in a very theatrical household.
Okay.
So I also did a lot of theater. Thank you. I do like it, and I do recommend it because it's therapeutic.
Right. Should we have a look? Because you made a video about one of those reenactment activities.
Yeah, but most of all, the most important of doing reenactment is know the history. That's the first thing.
Of course. Well, let's have a look. And to make it clear, we see the British against the Indonesian freedom fighters. Morgen. Ja. Het is 9.
Saudara-saudara, rakyat jelata di seluruh Indonesia.
How do you feel after being part? Because you have been part of it as well, I have understand. What does that to your emotional feelings?
Does it make you feel better?
Yeah. To us, yeah, it's a part of our pride, yeah, to remembering this battle, because we stand for our freedom, for the humanity, for the justice. So if some people here don't want to talk about what happened in the past, in Indonesia, it's the other way around. The old generation, they keep talking about it. I still remember my grandpa and grandma and their friends having a discussion meeting and then talking about the period, laughing. Yeah, they talk about it with pride. So also us, while we doing the reenactment, it's
okay. Interesting. I think that's just the other way around as with the Dutch culture, which is of course no pride at all, no talking, no open debate whatsoever. I'd like to give the floor again to people in the room. We have another 10 minutes for some questions, and make it a question, please. Okay, I won't give the mic, but
please give someone else. I make it a question first.
Okay, you think about the question. Others who are going to make it into a question. Yes. I come with you. Go ahead.
Hi there, my name is Sietske. I don't have a very complicated background because I'm just fully Dutch. I'm descendant of Frisian farmers, so nothing there. I was actually wondering, because you were talking about the pain of the Indo-Europeans, and something that I noticed a lot of times is if we talk about Indonesian fight for independence in the Netherlands, it's usually, but the Indo-Europeans, they were victims and it's sad and they had pain and it goes on and on. But on the other hand, if we talk about the Second World War, I've never in my whole life heard a speech like, well, it's very sad that they bombed Rotterdam, but at the end of the World War, the NSB kids and the Nazi kids had to move from their lovely house in the Netherlands to Germany. So why is that reaction on the Indonesian war like that? And it's everywhere like that. And on the other hand, we don't have that same opinion on the Germans invading the Netherlands.
And maybe because it's a different kind of situation, I think.
And how is it for you, personally? Because you talk a lot about your own ancestors, which I can get because they're your own family. But would you also activate for the Germans in the same way?
Maybe. Let's face it, if you look at the Germans, they occupied Holland and they did the most awful things. And I'm a man of reconciliation. When I was young, every German was wrong. Every German was a mob, was a crowd, was a dirty being. And we're about 50, 60 years farther away from that moment. And what's happening? What do you see in our society? Is a German a crowd, a mob? No. The young people, my daughter, anyone, they see them as just Germans. So I think what you need, and that's also for education, you need generations to ease, to soothe pain. Some people don't want to talk about it, and you can try to get them, try to. It's so hard to get to talk to people about that.
Okay, so it's one answer is it will take time.
Yeah, and well,
I hope.
Yeah, this is of course from the Germans. Well, they were seen as the bad guys right away because they invaded their country. But how can we do the same thing for Indonesia? Because the Dutch invaded their country. And that's a difference because we are not changing anything yet.
But Robin, please.
But do you see a when you're in Holland a difference between Indonesian people and Indo people, like I call them like that? Do you see them? Are they apart or are they together? Or
I think the difference is that
we'll go to another question because we are going to try to use the questions for a little bit more perspective. I think that's important too. So I have two more people on this side. Please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Shanti.
Can we have attention on this side, please? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Shanti, and I'm Indonesian. My question is simple. Since we are talking about reconciliation, have your parents perhaps expressed, or like perhaps from in this community, try to express to bridge the gap between in this community and Indonesian community, so that try to reconcile in the past, so that they choose a side to be one Indonesian nationality, something like that.
Can you repeat the question for me, please?
Since you are talking about reconciliation, have your parents or maybe other in this Dutch community try to choose a side to be Indonesian in the past, so that we don't have to such situation now.
No, they
because
didn't.
At that time it's like.
No, they went. No.
Okay, they didn't choose that position. No.
Exactly.
I saw that you were having a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so I come to you. One moment. Can you do it in English or is that difficult? Okay, and then I come to you, sir.
Yes, I just want to give a remark to the Indonesian, all of them, the whole history, between the Dutch invasion of the Germans, the Dutch invasion to Indonesia, and the German invasion into the Netherlands. I think the big difference is that Germany accepted their excuses. You know, they how do you call it? Their guilt. And the Netherlands didn't do anything. So I think there's a big difference. You know what I mean?
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Okay, a question from you. Ik probeer even bij u te komen. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My question was pretty simple, actually. Are people from Indonesia or people who are from Indonesia but live in the Netherlands, are they interested in reconciliation? Because we talk a lot about reconciliation and we want it. But is that something you'd be interested in? And if not, what are you interested in, if that makes any sense?
Okay. Ady, can you...
Talking about reconciliation, the first thing is you must admit that we are independent on August 17, 1945. That's the main point. Yeah.
Legally admit.
Legally. It's not just talking bullshit here and there. But yeah.
So you say if that is really clearly communicated, clearly said and done, then you sort of can open up a dialogue.
Yes, of course. If you want to have a good relationship between two persons, start to acknowledging each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And how do you right now would consider the relationship between the Netherlands and Indonesia, if you have to sort of describe it?
On what grounds?
Well, almost like two people having a relationship. How would you describe where we are in this development?
Well, I think I can answer this question on a whole different, from different angles here.
Right.
Because there is already a relationship between Dutch and Indonesian, especially a business relationship that's very, very profitable for both nations. And
tourism.
When we talk about history, then there's always going to be this elephant in the room, right. Because again, our Independence Day is not legally recognized.
Right.
And why?
Very simple question, yeah. You have a question. Ik hou hem vast.
Yeah, sorry for... yeah. Okay, my question is to Robin, actually, but also to the community. What does it mean if the Indonesian community, like every community that comes from an immigrant background, proudly waves their national flag of their origin, national origin? What does it mean to you? What feelings does it give you?
Well,
you see the Indonesian flag proudly waving, flying in the Dutch skies.
I think it's fantastic, and I think that they deserve it. Like you say, the 17th of August is still not recognized, but it will happen. I know it will happen, but it takes time. And I mean, they already made apologies, which I thought was a wonder that they did that. But it's a first step, I think.
Because actually, I want to explain this question. I think the Indonesian community deserves to be proud of their origin, but they don't dare it. Because I think most of the Indonesians living in the Netherlands suffer from an imposter syndrome. Because we have to be thankful to be in this country. We want to be diplomatic. We want to be friendly. But we don't. The Indonesian community, I think they don't have the feeling that they can they can be open and honest like you about your family background and their pain. And most of the Indonesian parents also living here in the Netherlands, like my parents, they don't dare to tell about their pains or to express their cultural clashes and their...
Help them change it.
What?
Yeah.
Help them change it.
Yes, of course. And
how is that for you?
It's motivating to see other people and also Indonesian people comments telling the story and the historical stories, because my parents never told it. So I think it's very good that Indonesians also discover their history, and together with the Dutch people we discover the real truths from the history.
So speak up, research, and be proud.
And both the Dutch flag and the Indonesian flag can wave together.
Can I add one more thing? I wanted to go back to reconciliation. I think before there could be any talks of reconciliation and peace or whatever, you need to have accountability. And there is none.
And this is this so-called acknowledging of guilt.
Yes.
Like the Germans did.
Again, the recognition of 17th of August 1945, the legal recognition, because that is going to open a whole lot of things that the Dutch don't want to be talking about.
Okay. Jeffrey, ik geef jou een heleboel gelegenheid, maar je spreekt het om te beginnen in het Nederlands en dan is het lastig te vertalen. Maar dan moet het een vraag zijn, een punt.
Het punt is dat het veel te gemakkelijk wordt gepraat over Indonesië, als het slecht is. Maar ze doen aan racisme. Omdat Indonesië niet bestaat voor Nederland. Tot de dag van vandaag zijn we niet erkend.
Okay. No recognition, and therefore still a racist proposition. Okay. Okay. I want to thank you all three very much for the opening of a debate which I think will be much longer, going to last, especially in the Netherlands. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Give them a big hand. Marjolein, you have a sort of a last word. You have been working on this book for a long period of time. You've been listening carefully to the debate. Shall we sit there and have a final thought for tonight? I hope you have a mic. Yeah. So, sort of first steps, especially in the perception of the Dutch, sort of hunger on recognition from the side of Indonesia. Where are you waiting for? And a lot of lack of knowledge still. That's what I have learned from tonight.
Yeah, I think it's historical what we just did, even though it is so small, to actually have one Indonesian giving a presentation and another one being part of the panel. But, you know, mostly they're in the minority, while if we know that Indonesia is also almost, right now, 280 million people. And yes, about this, I want to say two things. About the, maybe for some people it feels as a simplification to talk about perpetrator and victim, or about colonized and colonizer. And then people who are from mixed race or from other ethnicities will feel like, but where do I belong, right? But then, again, what I think is very important, what Fitria said about it, that these identities, the Indonesian identity, but also Dutch or the Indies, they are political identities. And some of these identities are born in racism, in colonialism. And that's where I think there is only one perspective that is legitimate, or that is morally right. That is, we are now against colonialism and racism, right? So then some of these identities should be, maybe...
reconsidered.
Reconsidered seriously. And that is one point. And then also about the reconciliation discussion, I think it sounds very beautiful. Right now, we know what's happening in Gaza, and we have seen a lot of people posting pictures. I think it's like you see a young Jewish boy or girl, and then with a very romantic, and a Palestinian boy or girl sitting together, and then that's actually
the information and propaganda war. Yeah.
Well, people who love peace post this. And I think they're all very lovely people who really maybe want peace. But in some occasions, there are two parties, but there is a colonizing party, and there is a party that undergoes this occupation. And then you cannot just equalize it, like as if those who experience the occupation have the same responsibility in being pro-peace, because those who experience the occupation are the first who want peace. It's not their responsibility. They undergo it, and they want peace. Of course they want peace. So that is, for reconciliation, we need to acknowledge, time and again, we keep to see this difference in power balance. And
so if you have to give an advice to the Dutch government to open up reconciliation, we have heard already, recognize the 17th of August. It's that simple. Start really talking, opening up, and plead guilty. What would your advice be above that?
They pay the 4.5 billion guilders that they have stolen from Indonesia in 1949. That would be a start. They don't want to talk about that. But yeah, so my most important point, maybe also in this book, is that when we talk about reconciliation, it's also about truth. There is a truth, and there are lies. And some things, and I think Buku Bung Tomo for me became the personification of this dehumanization that the Dutch did on Indonesians. So criminalize them, and their efforts of just wanting independence is being criminalized, and Bung Tomo is a clear example of that.
So information is key, and reality in, for example, the book is very important.
Yeah.
You like to thank some people, and we can show them in the back, because you have been speaking with a lot of people, of course, a lot of people who have helped you on the book, also your editor. We will show them in the back, and in the meantime, we will say thank you so much for joining us tonight, and especially everyone here in the room, and also the people who have been looking at this evening on the digital world. These are the people you like to say thank for.
Yeah, so. I see that not all their names are visible, so I will read them. Johan Pradana, he's from a historian from Malang who really helped me a lot with the research for a Bung Tomo book together with, here, Ady Setyawan. Hendy Johari is a historian from Jakarta. He's writing for Historia, that's an important magazine in Indonesia. And then Hakim he's from Jember in far east Java. He's a local historian who also helped us a lot. We visit him many times. And then Osa Kurniawan, he also helped me a lot. He had a huge library at his house, and he showed me many books that I should read about 1945. And Irma De Vita, who is actually not even a professional historian. She's a notary. But she wrote a book also about her grandfather who was killed by the KNIL and who also always accompanied me and helped me. So I really wanted to show you also their faces, their names, so that you can maybe start following them or know that these are not historians that are part of the the establishment or the big universities, but they're doing very great work, and I think I just wanted to thank them via this way.
Good. Thank you so much. Then we are going to conclude because it's almost a little bit later than we have expected. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
I have one picture left that I want to...
yes. That's your editor. Yeah.
No, not editor. It's my publisher.
Yes.
And Floor, thank you so much for what you have done and for giving me the opportunity. I know that maybe not always... maybe there were moments that you feel like, that maybe you don't really... But I think it's really, very special how you always supported me. And I just wanted to say thank you. And he just got, unfortunately for me, he just got retired. So we have to say goodbye to him. But thank you for everything.
Well, thank you. Again, thank you for being here. Also for the panel members, thank you so much. Also organizing from the Balie, the technical group in behind. One last point. You can also buy the book just around the corner. And thank you for being here. Bye.